So thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Scott King. I am VP of Marketing over here at Krista Software, and this is using machine learning to maximize M&A value. I'm joined by Billy Birdzell and Luther Birdzell, and I want to give an opportunity for those gentlemen to introduce themselves. Luther, thanks for joining me. What's your role here at Krista, and what are you supposed to be doing to help us out and our customers?
Hey, thanks, Scott. So I'm the chief data scientist at Krista, and our primary mission with AI is to make accurate models valuable. We've seen a huge acceleration in the overall data science space with machine learning and AI. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, teams were really struggling to train accurate models. The world overall has gotten much better at that. And we're now really into a last mile phase with that technology, I think, before we see the kinds of value being delivered to traditional business that we've seen in some of the digitally native businesses, a la Google, LinkedIn, Facebook. So Krista M&A is one of several examples of that, where we're taking some really exciting technology and helping create some efficiencies in a really important part of the market.
Okay, well, good. I'm looking forward to seeing what you say about what Bill says. So, Bill, Managing Director at Horatius Group, how are you? Let's know a little bit about you and your firm.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to share with you today. And Horatius Group is an investment bank, and we're focused on helping founder and family-owned companies do their first transaction with institutional capital. And in layman's terms, that's almost always a founder or a second or third generation sell the company to a private equity firm or a family office, as the case may be, sometimes to a strategic. And we just love working with founders. And one of the great issues we have is the mergers and acquisitions business really runs at human speed. And we look to Krista to allow us to use cutting edge artificial intelligence and machine learning to greatly accelerate the speed at which we can do our business.
And Scott, by the way, and for everyone attending, yes, Billy and I are brothers. It is not just a coincidence that we have the same last name.
Well, which is true, and what it really came down to is we're as we're scaling Horatius Group and identifying bottlenecks and quantifying how much time we're spending on various processes. I called Luther and said, my goodness, there has to be some sort of software to help us. And he said, I think we can figure that out. And so a collaboration was born.
Well, good. It's always nice to do business with family and friends. So, Bill, you said something about doing business at human speed. Can you describe a little bit more about that? And then obviously what we want to do is provide some insight on what happens after you fix that at machine speed. So, but what does that mean, human speed? How fast is that? Can you give me some scale?
I don't know, is it 150 words a minute? So when we think about how fast we can read, that's human speed. When we think about how fast we can convert data from one format to another by pushing buttons, that's human speed.
Okay. And then as you're doing one of these M&A activities, how much human speed do you need? How long does this take?
It takes a lot longer than it needs to because so much of what the industry does is using Excel for databasing as opposed to databases for databasing. And it's a lot of reading, a lot of data, and the extent to which we can automate those processes, the faster we can do it. And especially with the products of Krista M&A, is identifying the negatives. I was reminded of I started my career in the Marine Corps, and I served in the infantry, and I served in special operations, and I saw the former commanding general of special operations somewhat recently, and I said, "Hey, sir, how does it all work in terms of who is it that can be successful in our community? Because in special operations, every single person who's ever tried is recorded, and there's data on all of these people, intelligence and personality, and then if they passed or failed at various stages, and then how they did once they made it to the operating forces." And what he told me, I will always stay with me. And he said, "Billy, we know who can't do it. And so all the testing identifies the no's, because if you fail the tests, there's basically no way you can do it. However, if you don't fail the tests, they don't know who will be successful, and thus those individuals have to go through these very, very difficult and long screening processes." And so the extent which we can take a framework such as that and apply to mergers and acquisitions, where we can identify negatives, and then for the remaining, we can spend much more quality time identifying a positive, and special operations does pretty well. And so the extent to which we can kind of use a framework like that with technology to sort out the negatives so that we can spend more time on the positives, one would surmise would lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. And Scott, just one thing to add there. The central theme we're going to be discussing today is how Krista M&A helps finance professionals focus on high quality deals.
Okay, and that would go back to filtering out the no's, right? If I can take out the no's of the people in special ops, that's an interesting analogy. I like that. That's going to stick with me too.
Yeah, and it's all high, it's all high consequence. So Luther can talk about AI and data infinitely better than I can. But like special operations, they're very discrete individuals, and the pass fail on those individuals are very high consequence. And it's similar to deals, where each deal is its own, has its own unique attributes to it, and we want to get the nose out of the way as fast as possible. And on the M&A side of it, as an investment banker, of course, that's working with capital partners. But for us, there's also business development. And this was the other part of my conversation with Luther, is I have a database of some 15,000 potential companies. And I want to know who I should call, which is the inverse, or it's 1 minus those I shouldn't call. So if I can eliminate all those I shouldn't call, well, then my efforts can then be focused on who I should call, and that will lead to much better outcomes.
Interesting. So Luther, what exactly, what did you do with that data in terms of connecting all the disparate data sources? Did you have to massage the data and correlate the data for, AI to work? Kind of walk us through that process.
Sure, Scott. So on the outreach side, just one quick piece of context. What we heard from Horatius, and we're hearing from the other customers we're working with Krista M&A, is that biz outreach, especially in M&A, has such low hit rates and really requires very skilled and correspondingly high cost resources, people, to do a lot of that work. So our main goal there was, there was some data wrangling and data engineering that had to be done on the foundational data set. But the fundamental problem is that the foundational data set is incomplete. So we used AI to, and this is a collection of various different types of proprietary technology, to really enrich the data. So there's some things that we can learn about companies from websites. To Billy's point earlier about moving at machine speed, that's a slow process. We then were also able to learn about companies from LinkedIn and then other public sources. So that's one side of the data enrichment, was about the companies themselves, but the company level details really only cover a fairly superficial level of the screening. What really what really makes and breaks these deals is ultimately cultural fit. So one of the fundamental things with machine learning and AI that it enables us to do is be more predictive. So by not only enriching the company data, but also by, and this starts on the company websites and LinkedIn, looking at the management teams and the board of directors, the key, folks in these companies, and then also enriching that data in aggregate with the right technology is enabling our customers to be more predictive about cultural fit, which is one of the most powerful, or we're being told is, one of the most powerful screening contributions that we can make, which is why we started there. Bill, anything to add to that?
Well, in an essence, no. Whether you're thinking about like Time Warner, AOL, and that merger, or you're thinking about acquisitions of lower middle market companies with 5 or 10 million in earnings, culture is king. And you can have a profitable business with high growth and sticky customers. If the people don't fit, the deal isn't going to work. And that also is, and this, the M&A business, especially in the lower middle market with founder and family-owned companies, is an incredibly personal business. It's the blood, sweat, and tears and decades of hard work and sacrifice and oh my goodness, I get excited talking about it, because to be let into that world and to hear the stories and to hear how they started is just really special to me. And that only works if we can build a relationship, because I have to be trusted, and I have to trust those with whom we are doing once in a generation or once in a multi-generation transaction that has intergeneration effects, and the capital that we're able to monetize from a life's work or from multi-generations work can impact multiple generations. And so who I can work with and who my team can work with is limited. And that's true with everyone, right? Not everyone can be a fit with everyone else. So the extent to which we can use technology tools to identify those with whom we have connections, with whom we have a high probability of being able to have a relationship, is just key. It is really important, so that we have the highest probability of spending our time on a positive success.
So Bill, would it be fair to say then that Krista M&A for the biz dev outreach is transforming a process that was really dominated by cold intros to unqualified companies, not surprisingly very low hit rate there, into one which now you mentioned both the mutual connections and the pre-screening? So transforming cold leads into basically just a random set of the space into warm leads on pre-qualified opportunities?
It's a difference between wandering around in the dark and hoping your shin hits something soft as opposed to something hard, and having night vision goggles and a flashlight.
Sounds good to me.
Interesting. And, Bill, you went back to trust, right? And build trust and connections. How did you do it before? And then obviously, Luther, I want you to talk about, how Krista helps you enable trust, because, just because the technology tells you to do something, you still have to either believe it or not believe it. So it's interesting how you talked, Bill, about the trust. Is that really the most important thing?
Human endeavors are relationship based because they involve humans, and business is a human endeavor. And the technology is like a flashlight, or it's like night vision goggles, which are a form of technology which augment our human abilities of vision. And so I think of AI and ML like night vision goggles. They have some limitations, like we don't have great depth perception and we have a rather narrow field of view, but my goodness, I'd rather be looking through them than looking for them. And before it's word of mouth or luck. And when we rely on word of mouth, then we're surrendering our fate to the actions of others. So that maybe someone will make a referral, maybe that individual won't. And then luck, no good plan is built on hope. While with these technology tools, well, we have 86,400 seconds a day, and the extent to which those can be used more productively is definitional to value creation. And so I think of using this type of technology, as I said before, like walking around in the dark with night vision goggles. It's not perfect, but it's way better than not having them.
Yeah, it's way better. And then Luther, from that standpoint and building the trust, and this is a low volume. You talked about digital native companies earlier, like the Googles and Facebooks. They have tons of data going through the 86,400. I forget. It's 86 something seconds, right?
86,400 seconds per day. So there's no fast days or slow days. They all happen 1 second at a time.
Yeah. So there's a lot of data that goes through there, but this is low. What's the big difference, Luther?
So Scott, one of the fundamental differences is that companies like Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon are able to be extremely profitable businesses while being wrong a lot. If you think about the actual click-through rates on the advertising that Google presents while you're using their search engine, very, very few of those actually convert into revenue-generating transactions. Virtually no other businesses outside of that kind of, we call, one of the terms we use is digitally native business, can afford to be wrong really at all, much less be wrong most of the time and still enjoy a very profitable business. So one of the things that when I started my last business in 2013, focused on oil and gas, that was a relatively, much smaller data than Google, much higher consequences. And it's taking a lot of that learning of how do we apply these technologies to high consequence, high cost decisions in businesses that really can't afford to be wrong. And trust is ultimately the enabler of not only the human to human interactions, but it's also a prerequisite for humans adopting technology. At Krista, we've been extremely thoughtful about not following the adoption models that kind of Google and Facebook use, which I think for a lot of the folks out there is kind of a natural starting point, right? You look to folks who are being successful with something, and then you aspire to emulate them as closely as you can, is generally a reasonable strategy. In this case, with this technology, AI and machine learning, it just simply doesn't work. The notion that we are going to replace a human process with an automated one, and especially one that's as black box as AI and ML kind of inherently are, it's failed over and over again. And we've all seen the kind of the alarming statistics on A, how much money is being invested in this space, and then, B, how little of it is really converting into value creation within the businesses making the investments. Accordingly, at Krista, we are presenting the AI very much in parallel, in a very transparent way, with the traditional status quo process. And our ability to very quickly and easily integrate and model the end-to-end processes really gave us a unique ability then to introduce ML, again, in that transparent way, with the transparency and the control that decision makers who are making, highly strategic, highly material, high consequence decisions absolutely need to be able to start adopting these technologies. Once they start in that really human machine collaboration focused mode, we then also give them the ability to start converting those processes into fully automated pieces, kind of model by model or step by step. So it's really breaking away from this, really perpetually failing approach to AI, where we just do this wholesale cutover from the old way to the new way. It just doesn't work with high cost, high consequence decision. So that's why we're taking the route we are, and we're hearing from Bill that that approach has been pretty effective for Horatius.
Oh, it's fantastic, and especially for those of you who aren't familiar, a CIM, a confidential information memorandum, is the deck, if you will, that investment bankers create for a company, and it's like the core marketing document. It's the deck, if you will, that gets distributed. And these can be, 60 slides, and each one of those slides probably could have 4 charts on it, or could have, any combination thereof. But each slide is very dense, and to really go through them takes hours. Well, if we can go through it in seconds and create a scorecard, well, that can be a absolutely not. So we just automated a no. Or it can be a, hey, this needs more evaluation, and then create a 1-pager. So now you're going from a 60-page, very dense book, as we sometimes call them, to a 1-pager with bullets. And then after you read the 1-pager, reading the sim, it's like the 3rd time you've read it. So if we can read that sim once, as to have to read it repeatedly, because we've had some technology assist us in pulling out some key information and giving us a little bit of a framework as to what we're looking at, that's just time. And that turns into value. And it's just very exciting to be working with such a great team that's been so thoughtful and open-minded, but at the same time, very rigorous in the types of technology and then where they're sourcing it and using their proprietary systems in order to create a software that, as far as I know, doesn't exist.
So Bill, with that, I mean, with the sim and using the scorecard, do you think other investment banks could use this? Are they doing something like this? Are they, rolling their own? Like, what do you think other people are doing, and how could they use it?
Other organizations hire summa cum laude graduates from the best universities in the world and have them read the Sims 3 times.
So do you think they're using machine learning or AI to do any of that, or is it still just manual?
As far as I know, it is not done. It's not done at the bulge bracket of the firms whose names we all know when they're evaluating the largest transactions with global companies. And I've never heard of anyone, I don't know anyone who knows anyone who's seen this done across the lower middle market with smaller investment banks. And it can help every single one of them because it both creates time, but by creating time, we're creating quality. And by creating quality, we're maximizing value. So the business development part, that could work for selling jet engines. That could work for any type of high consequence solution-based sales process. And on the sim reading, diligence evaluation, digging through very dense documents, well, that could work for insurance, real estate, and it most certainly is a value to finance and the mergers and acquisitions world of buying and selling companies.
Bill, by the way, you mentioned the example you used, you really focused on the Sims. Do you want to comment on the kind of, the more organic biz dev route, where we're also essentially pulling the same investment criteria specific set of questions from documents that are, typically provided on a diligence request list? Any?
Sure. So just end to end here, right? We have 3 buckets. When Luther said, give me the questions you want to ask Krista. So we have asked Krista. So I said, ask Krista, okay, who should I call? Who should I call back? And how much should we pay? i.e., what's for sale? Who should we evaluate? And how much should we pay? And those are like 3 universal questions for really any business, for any kind of business development, sales, and evaluation process. So when I launched Horatius Group, I did it because I realized that the democratization of technology was such that we all have the same 4 C's. We all have the same computer, cell phone, credit card, and coffee. Right? My cell phone calls the same numbers as everybody else's. We all have access to the same databases. So then it's about who we're calling And that's a combination of evaluating very large data sets and then saying, I'm going to call this individual at this time. And so by enriching that process, now I have a much higher probability of calling the right person for the right reason at the right time. And that turns into meetings. And then after that, it's in my hands, not the computer's hands. And we do pretty well there. So off we go. And then when we get into this reading business, this just massively intense process of reading, well, the extent to which we can automate that process or use technology in some ways to invert it, like reading the end before you start, or taking these dense documents, turning into bullet points so that we now have a framework and understand where it's going, and then we really don't have to read it once in order to have the critical pieces. And then scorecards help us quantify what we're doing. If you can't measure it, well, it's awfully hard to improve it. And so by using a scorecard system, and everyone has different scorecards, and if you don't have a quantitative scorecard, you're using some sort of heuristics or qualitative scorecard. But by doing it quantitatively, we can then, as we're looking at specific companies or specific industries, and we can adjust them accordingly, we can have a consistent benchmark on which to compare companies. And a lot of this, the Krista sim reader automatically scores it. So then I only have to go through and find a little bit of information which I have to score, and then boom, we just accelerate in an hour's process to minutes.
Outstanding. So Luther, I would assume this is pretty easy to pull off. What kind of effort is required?
No sleep for months for many, many people. No, all the R&D aside, which is all in the bank now. The level of effort required when we're starting with a new customer is really 3 very simple steps. We provide a template that we initially developed with the Horatius Group about a standard set of questions that companies typically want to know and they want answers to for initial screening, along with certain thresholds. So that are fund investment criteria specific. So for example, if EBITDA or revenue or some other financial metric is not above a certain threshold or between a certain threshold, then put it in the no pile. That's simple example. We also are able to ask some more sophisticated things as well. So step number 1 is to refine the list of questions such that they are fund investment criteria specific. There's then a simple contract to get started, and part of this, we're aware that we're selling to most of the software that I've done over the past 20-25 years has been in startups and small organizations selling into companies that kind of generally had a culture of nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. So you go with the status quo, kind of big vendors. That's a safe play. So to go with something newer and more innovative from a small company was kind of the fundamental sales obstacle that I've worked through most of my career. Finance, at least so far, seems to be an industry in which nobody got fired for not investing in technology. Billy mentioned at the top of the call that most of this is really expensive human capital using basically VisiCount. This is like 1980s spreadsheet technology. Excel has become the standard there, but it's basically it's 40-year-old technology. So we had to be very thoughtful and really do as much innovation on the business model side of this as we did on the technical innovation side. And one of the things that includes is a very low cost starting point, proof of value, and then the AI is really consumed in a utilization based model. So taking things that are generally very expensive to buy outright or to engage in a pure SaaS model, and by doing it in a hybrid SaaS model with the utilization based AI, we're certainly breaking down some barriers, especially we're breaking down barriers and starting to win hearts and minds. And then of course the third piece is the historical data. there's been huge progress in computer reading. There was a huge inflection point a few years ago with language models. So kind of before that, computer literacy, computer reading had really centered around fancy versions of matching name value pairs or matching patterns, things like n-grams and such. A few years ago, these language models really drove through an inflection point, which very quickly accelerated computers' reading comprehension. They're not all the way to humans yet, but substantially higher. So that technology is doing better and better and getting closer to what some folks call general AI, which is machine learning that we can train on one set of data and then apply to many, many other sets of data. That's better than it used to be, but it's still not all the way there. So the third thing we really need to do is to do incremental training on these models, on these reading models, with the customer's specific data. So this is going to be the historical SIMs with their questions, and then using a combination of intelligent OCR, which is kind of unpacking the content into a more structured form, and then being able to similarly use NLP to extract, really to answer the meaningful questions, are essentially the three steps. And it took me much longer to describe those than it should have, excuse me. But the end-to-end process from kind of decision point to fully operational in production with proof of value is less than 4 weeks and requires typically only a couple hours of our customers' time up front. We then do the evaluation, and we then move forward into production. So it's designed to be very low touch and low risk from the customer standpoint, which quite frankly is just as unique with these technologies as the solution.
And if I can add, I love what they've done with the pricing, and it's the first time I've ever heard of it, where you're paying for what you use. And what I like about that is you have, as Luther described, you have different mechanisms to look at the data, and then you have the Krista, nuclear reactor and proprietary systems for analyzing it. And what AI was coined in like 1957 or something like that, or 1952, way back when. So I just said, Luther, this is what I want it to do. I don't care what it's called. And I don't really care how it works. I just care that it works. And so nevertheless, we go through cycles. Sometimes we're heavy in the business development cycle. And so we're using more of one type of technology, figuring out who we should call. And then if we're into a lot of deals, we're using other types of technology, figuring out who we should call back and how much we should pay for it. And so by doing that, we have that core Krista proprietary technology system, but we're only paying for what we're using. And I love that, because so often, if you want the CD player, that's, I'm not so young anymore, unfortunately. If you want the sound system where you have to buy the wheels and the roof and the lights and all the other stuff, right? Or they get you on the package deal, and that's true with software too. I only want 1 or 2 types of technology, but in order to have that, I have to buy 10 types of technology. And with the Krista system, it's a really a la carte menu, and then you can see what works best for you at what time. And so it's really fair the way that they've really tailored this pricing for what we're using and when we're using it.
And Bill, part of that too came out of our conversations, which you really helped shed a lot of light on about kind of the breakdown in the space. Obviously, we've all heard of the big investment banks, the Goldman Sachs, the Morgan Stanleys of the world. But can you shed a little bit of light on how most of the companies in the United States and even internationally, are getting sold, kind of what size teams and who's doing those transactions?
Sure. So there's the bulge bracket investment banks, which the household names of the Goldman Sachs's and JP Morgan Chase and Morgan Stanley, UBS. And those are global institutions. They do virtually every type of financial service. They have incredible people who work there, and they serve massively large corporations. So if you're a Fortune 500 company and you have a global footprint, well, then your service providers, whether they be investment bankers, accountants, law firms, tech firms, have to also have a global platform. And there's transactions where they're issuing currencies or issuing securities in multiple currencies in multiple markets. And that requires a certain size and scale of an institution. And they do a wonderful job with that type of work. But there's not that many companies of that scale. And subsequently, there's not that many investment banks or financial institutions of that scale. And for a little perspective, around the dot-com bubble, there were 7,000 publicly traded companies. Now there's 3,500 publicly traded companies. The average time a company spends on the S&P 500 is only 16 years, when years ago it was like 60 years. And so at that, big global level, you're seeing faster turnover and disruption. And you're seeing these, companies get on those listings later. And why are they getting listed later? Because there's more private capital than ever before. And that there's a number of reasons that drive that, but nevertheless, you have the growth of private markets and more private capital, dry powder, as they say, than we've ever had. And as a result, companies can stay private longer. To think that we've had IPOs recently where the companies are all of a sudden in the middle of the S&P 500, right? That just didn't happen 20 or 30 years ago. So we have more private capital and more companies staying private longer, but also too, in the lower middle market and middle market, there's a lot of companies. So for example, as I said, there's 3,500 publicly traded companies. Well, there's something like 150,000 companies that are privately held, founder and family-owned businesses with earnings between $3 and $15 million. And the data that I've seen said that 2/3 of those are owned by baby boomers. And you also have some intergenerational changes where 20 years ago, 75% of those companies would have gone from a founder to a next generation. And now they're going to private buyers. So there's just an all-time high level of activity between privately held companies of this size and third-party buyers, which private equity is probably the most ubiquitous, but you also have strategics, which are bigger companies that are consolidating industries and what have you. And so as this process unfolds, just like, if you want to go get heart surgery, you should probably see a heart surgeon. And if you're having neurological issues, go see a neurologist. So if you want to sell your business, hire people who know how to sell businesses. And as a result of the democratization of technology and information, well, more and more founders and families are choosing to use boutique investment banks, which I define as investment banks with 10 or fewer employees. And a lot of that, in my opinion, is relationship driven and specialized knowledge and, very personal track records where a team did a great job for someone, and then an individual in that person's network hires that team. And so brand, as far as I can see, in the lower middle market, is less important than relationships and those human connections. And so we get an engagement, and there's a team with the attorneys, the accountants, the investment bankers, and most importantly, the founders or the family, as the case may be. And we have to do quite an analysis and an understanding, and put together the marketing materials, and then distribute those materials, i.e. the SIM, to buyers who we think will be a great fit. And then just like in any relationship, we have a lot of phone calls and visits and lots of information, and hopefully get to a close under the right terms with the right structure.
Bill,
Perfect.
thank you so much for that. And excuse me, Scott, just one comment I just wanted to make there, that with so much of the volume being done by so many individual, really small teams that are way too small to resource their own IT departments, or do their own R&D in this space, we were very thoughtful about that when we were developing Krista M&A, so that this technology, as advanced as it is, does fit for the really small boutique firms, as well as scales to some of the larger ones.
Well, that's right, and that's been so awesome for us, because I believe there's 3,000 broker dealers in the United States, and everybody can name 10 of them. So if you think like the top 10 do something like 50% of the M&A by deal size, and you do a $20 billion transaction, well, it's not possible to get to 20 billion, 50 million at a time. But in terms of the number of transactions, the number that are happening with small teams is at an all-time high, and appears to continue to grow. And of course, small teams, just as you said, don't have data scientists. So what's going on at the global institutions serving global companies is very, very different than privately held companies transacting with local capital or capital inside the United States. And so some plug and play tech just continues this democratization of technology and information. So, we all have the same Microsoft Office products, but the extent to which we can get industrial strength AI and analysis tools, which used to be just for the biggest companies, gives us an advantage whereby we can use our strengths in a way that allows smaller firms to continue to give just a great service to some of these founders and families that have built fabulous companies.
Thanks so much, Bill. Scott, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions right now, and probably because you guys have done an outstanding job of answering all of the maybe obvious ones, but I really appreciate that summary, Bill. Any closing thoughts from you, Luther? What if I'm a small firm like Bill described, what should I do next?
So if you're a small firm that believes you can create more value for yourselves, and if you have them LPs, by being able to focus on higher quality deals, please give us a call, send me an email, luther@kristasoft.com, and we'd love to show you what we're up to.
All right, thank you, Luther. And then Bill, on your side, I really, really, really appreciate all the information and your enthusiasm and your colorful analogies, some that'll live with me forever, like the Special Ops Command. But any closing thoughts?
If night vision goggles, it's better to be looking through them than looking for them. And this stuff basically lets you see in the dark. And that's and quite literally, right? If you're doing just general mass business development to the same list everybody else has, you're stumbling in the dark. And even though Luther's my brother, they still made me pay. And I don't know if we're ever going to get over that. And there may be some issues around Christmas regarding this, but I had to pay. And I'm so happy I did, because this team is fabulous, and they have grossly exceeded my expectations with the power of this technology and the speed at which they've been able to tailor it for the problem set that we work on every day.
Thanks, Bill. We're focused on return on investment, not cost, right?
Oh yeah, that's what he's telling me. So yeah, we're working through that, but the tech is fabulous.
Well, great. Again, thanks, guys, and thank everybody for joining us. And please be in touch.
All right. Thanks so much, Scott. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye, guys.